Ever wondered how those app icons on your iPhone or MacBook wiggle so charmingly? Or what makes that playful animation pop up when you type a wrong word in Wordle? It's simpler than you think. It's all about a minimal animation. In this video, we'll build a simple wiggle animation using CSS and afterwards using Angular Animations. So let's start. First of all, let's create a new Angular component using the following CLI command: nggc wiggle-css. In the template, let's add some text and a simple button with class button and wiggle. Then let's go to the SCSS file and add the following rules. For host element, set the width to 50% and the height to 10% of the viewport. Center all content by using display flex, align items center and justify content center. Set the flex direction to column and add a gap of 1 rem between elements. Let's also make the button a little bit prettier by customizing its color, border and typography. Finally, the wiggle class will add a wiggle animation of 1 second with a easy in-out timing function. Now we need to define the keyframes for the animation, so let's set the start and end state to normal and then alternate the frames between rotation of +10 and -10 degrees. In the app component TS file, let's import the new wiggle component, and in the app component HTML, let's add the app wiggle CSS selector. Run the app using ngserve, and here it is, the simple wiggle of 1 second. However, this animation runs immediately and only once. Let's simulate a timeout by increasing the duration to 4 seconds, setting the animation iteration count to infinite, and updating the keyframes so all actions happen after 80% of time has elapsed, so basically after a 3.2 seconds delay. Let's check this out. And here it is. Now let's try and trigger that animation on a custom event. We will create a new component using nggc wiggle-click command. Let's update the app component ES file to include the new wiggle CSS component into the imports, and update the app component HTML to include the new template selector. Let's copy the contents of the CSS file from the first component, but reset back the animation duration to 1 second, remove the infinite animation count, and change the keyframe values to the initial ones. Let's also copy the content of the template, but change the text content and add a click handler for the button that will go to onWiggleClick method. And also set a reference variable for the button. Let's also change the button text to clickme and format the file. In WiggleClick component TS file, first let's add the viewChild property for the variable created before. We'll call it WiggleButton and it will be an element ref of HTML button element. Import the necessary decorators and classes. And now implement the onWiggleClick handler method. In order to trigger an animation, we just simply remove and add the animation class. We do this by removing and adding wiggle to the class list property of the native element on wiggle button. But it won't work like that because it simply happens too fast. What we need to do, and it's not pretty at all as it relies on a side effect, is to call the offset width of the native element of the viewChild. And now let's check this. And it works. Now, because we are in Angular, there is another option to trigger the animation on the element, and it is by using a directive. So let's create a new component using nggc wiggle-css directive command, and a new directive using ngg-d-wiggle. Just copy the CSS from WiggleClick component, as well as the content of the HTML file, but replace the text content, remove the click handler and reference variable, and add the directive while also importing it into the standalone component. Now, in the directive, let's inject the element ref, and using host listener, implement the logic for click event by implementing the same trick used before. Remove the wiggle class, call the offset width, and add the wiggle class again. Update the app component HTML to include the new selector and check if it works. And it does. Now let's do the same using Angular Animations. So let's create a new component using nggc wiggle-ng-animations1 command. Inside it, add the animations property for the component decorator. Create a new trigger named wiggle and import the function. Add first state to it named start, and add a style for it with a rotate of 0 degrees. Then add the same state named end with the same style rotation of 0 degrees. Afterwards, define a transition between these two states. It will trigger an animation of 1 second that will have a list of keyframes. Rotation of -10 degrees at 25%, 10 degrees at 50%, and -10 degrees again at 75%. In the component, let's create a property named wiggle that will hold the start state in a string, and a method named toggleWiggle to change the state between start and end. In order for the animations to work, we need to update the config file and provide the animations. Now let's go to the HTML template and add some text content and a button. Here we need to provide a triggerer for the animation and assign it to the property holding the state name, and also add the click handler. Let's also copy a part of the CSS file for the host and button, add a new selector to the app component HTML and test it. Now here it is. Finally, instead of using two states, we can use only one. So let's create a new component using ng-gc wiggle ng animations 2, then update the app HTML with the new selector and copy the CSS from before. Copy the animations code as well, but we need to adapt it. So let's keep only one state and name it default. Then update the transition state names from void to default. Now the wiggle property will hold the void state by being an empty string. We'll reset the wiggle property on click directly in the template, but we also need an action handler that will name onAnimationDone for the animation end event, where we will reset the state back to the empty string. Inside, we check if event2state is equal to default, and then the wiggle property will be set to empty string. In the template, we keep the same button and triggerer. As said before, we update the state on click, but we also need to attach the animation done event to the method created before and attach the event as argument. Let's check this out, and here it is. We have implemented the wiggle animation in multiple ways. See you next time.